So why are we here today? Again, people think that you're here because you're going to learn about AI. And as I said yesterday, that is an excuse. The AI is sort of a silver object that we're dangling in front of you. But what we would like to really want you to take away from here is learning how to learn, which almost is never taught in school. You're not taught how to learn. You're given things to learn. You memorize it. You spit it back to the teachers, and then suddenly you finish your course already. But in the end, the skills to be able to learn is not really invested in. And this is what we are going to focus on over the next 2 days. And learning how to learn, what is the main ingredient of learning how to learn? It's working with people who don't think like you. That is how you learn. And there are 3 key concepts here that are very largely overlapping. The first is data science, the second is critical thinking, and the third is systems thinking. And there's a lot of overlap between all those concepts. And that is really what we're hoping that you take away. Okay. What we're hoping that you take away from this event. And to us, the legacy of AI is making us better critical thinkers. Suddenly, when the data is in front of you, or when the data is not in front of you, you realize the flaws, how broken the system is. And you also realize that it will take a whole village, really, to fix the system. And rather than focusing on an end product, and I always say I am not interested in a model with some AUC at the end. Because if you rush through coming up with some model with some estimate of how they perform, I think you are missing the whole value of this event. So even if you don't have a model at the end, that's perfectly fine. What we would like you to report tomorrow is what did you learn about data science, what did you learn about the field, what did you learn from each other. So don't rush. And we have been guilty of this before. In the previous generation of datathons, we have been rushing students to make models. What we wanted you to focus on is understanding the data. And that is so much more difficult to do. You can only do that if you truly look at the data with people who have different backgrounds. And unfortunately, this is a strategy that is very rare. I think the top institutions, that is what separates them from the rest of the world, is to create this environment where it's much easier for people from different schools, different departments, across generations to work with each other. So I think that this should be our goal, is to recreate, replicate that culture in Uganda. And we were having discussions about, during breakfast, that I am concerned that we're infecting you as well with some of the bad habits that we have in the United States of just focusing on a paper and publishing the paper. And I feel that to a certain degree, we have really sucked the joy of learning from what we are doing. We suck the curiosity from what we're doing. If all your focus is on the destination and not focusing on the journey, we're focusing on the grave rather than enjoying life. So I'm hoping that this is something that we could infect you with, really the joy of learning from each other. So what we wanted you to really take away from these 2 days is being able to ask the right questions about the data. So we call this the backstory of the data. The data did not magically appear out of thin air. There were people who collected the data, and those people would have their own biases. They use instruments that are also biased, because the instruments that we're using, they did not have Ugandans as subject matter when they optimized those instruments. So there are already two sources of bias there. The instruments that you're using, the people who collected the data, and then you're going to add your own bias, the bias of the people who are developing and then deploying the models. So the analogy that I often give about the not understanding the backstory of the data, and I've used this analogy over and over during my talks, is about a drunk man who lost his wallet in a big park. And he was looking for his wallet under the lamppost. And a policeman came up to him, "What are you doing, sir?" "I'm looking for my wallet." And the policeman asked the drunk man, "Did you lose your wallet here?" And the drunk man said, "No, but this is where the light is. Why would I look for my wallet in the dark?" And it's very true for science. Science is what appears in people who are looking for it in the light, under the light. The same thing with AI. AI is what magically is conjured because that's where the data exists. But we don't have data from 4.5 billion people who do not have an encounter with the health system. And saying that our AI is going to work for everyone is a delusion. So I'm not saying that we should stop doing AI. I'm actually saying that we should hurry up in developing AI and deploying AI. And why is that? Because the current health system is broken. It's broken everywhere. We travel around the world, and even in some socialist countries like Scandinavia, where they think that their healthcare is better, it's not. There are always people who don't benefit from the technologies, from the clinicians who provide health care in those countries. So there are so many examples, and I could take hours and hours to talk to you about the bias of the data, but it's not going to work. Like, you could listen to me now, and you will forget all about it again next week. So to me, this is going to be a journey. What we want you to really strive to be is a lifelong learner. And you cannot be a lifelong learner on your own. Critical thinking only happens when you are surrounded by people who have different life experiences as you do. And this is why we feel so privileged that we are able to learn every day as we go, and every week, every month, as we go from country to country. Because everyone has a different view of the world. And to be able to understand the world better, you have to see it through the lens, through the eyes of people who have very different experiences as you do. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and I know the word explainability came up so many times yesterday, and there was a debate of how important explainability is. And I'm in the camp that actually does not believe that explainability is very important, because this is perfect recipe for our own biases to be reinforced. It's explainable when it's consistent with our understanding, and it's not explainable if you see some differences. And the story that I give about explainability is Lee Sedol, who was an expert in the board game Go. And in 2016, he was beaten by AlphaGo, which was an AI that was developed by DeepMind. And when they're looking at the moves, so Lee Sedol would make a move, AlphaGo would make a move. The move that beat Lee Sedol, no expert could explain. Like, why would AlphaGo do that move? And they thought that Lee Sedol had won because AlphaGo did a move that no one can explain. And that was the move that beat Lee Sedol. And this is why I'm optimistic about AI. It's going to teach us things that never even occurred to us. And it does that by bringing in data from millions of people, if not billions of people. So there's really an opportunity to overhaul the medical knowledge system. And I have been critical of the medical knowledge system from the very start. And I think this is the reason why I went into machine learning, because I realized that what I've learned from textbooks, what I read from journals, are observations of a certain demographic from rich countries. And then we are expected to believe that these lessons learned, these conclusions apply to this patient in front of me who is so different from the description of a certain patient with a disease that you read on textbooks. And I'm going to quote from Teresa Handel, and she talks about epistemic injustice. Epistemic injustice is how you are harming certain groups because we were taught to believe that this is the way things go, and because we lack understanding about that group, we harm them. And the example that we often give is, for example, heart attacks. The description of heart attacks in textbooks and in journals are primarily observations of white men with heart attacks. It turns out that women have what we refer to as atypical, and it's atypical because it's not the same as our observations of white men. And for that reason, women have worse outcomes from heart attacks because the way we learned how to diagnose and treat heart attacks was based on our studies on white men. And I'm pretty sure as well that we've harmed a lot of people around the world with heart attacks because our understanding of heart attack is so limited. And this is why I got excited about data, about building capacity so that everyone has their own local medical knowledge system. I think that the textbooks and how we teach medicine is going to evolve very, very drastically. That in the future, we will be using local medical knowledge fueled by the application of data science on the data that you're collecting in your own country. And I think that that should be our moonshot. That should be what you should be aspiring for. So this slide talks about the last kilometer of model development. I told you that I am not in favor of spending lots of time on shaft values and on heat maps because I think that that's opportunity cost. Rather than focusing on explainability of the model, I want you to focus on explainability of the errors. Because AI is never going to be 100% accurate. We are celebrating if it's 95% accurate. But before you deploy that model, I want you to think, who are the 5%? Because this 5% will be given wrong diagnosis, wrong treatment recommendations. So we have a lot of projects of really understanding who the last 5%, last 2%, last 10%. And it turns out that they are the people who are receiving poorer care to begin with. They are the people who have worse outcomes to begin with. And now you deploy AI, you're going to kill them all because you're going to give them wrong diagnosis and wrong treatment recommendations. So to me, it's our responsibility to learn why these people are fooling AI, why AI thought that this patient does not have pneumonia based on a chest x-ray when in fact the chest x-ray has pneumonia. So to me, it's more worthwhile to focus on trying to explain the errors of the model rather than explaining how the model worked. Like, we will never be able to explain a deep model because deep model is layers and layers of representations. Like, the first one is representation of the original feature space, and then you create another representation of the representation layer. So being able to point out exactly why a certain diagnosis or a certain treatment recommendation was outputted by the model, I think is an illusion. It's a delusion. So we'll talk about that later on. What else did I write here? a usual problem that we see everywhere we go is that the people spend at least 50% of the time figuring out the details of the study design. And I always say that it's very contrary to how we used to do clinical research, where you are required to list all the features that you need, give a definition of the outcome. And the reason for that is that what you want is not to bias the way you perform the study. So you have a preset way, preset recipe, preset menu of what you're going to study. And it doesn't work that way for machine learning. The study design is going to evolve as you understand the data. So to me, don't waste too much time on a whiteboard or on your computers figuring out how will we conduct this study. Because I think that becomes clearer as you become more familiar with the data. And more importantly, you become familiar about the limitations of the data. Most important thing, and we hammer this over and over again, is the need for you to be talking to each other throughout the process of model building. So the clinicians cannot come in at the beginning and at the end. That's not good enough. And you also waste the opportunity to learn from each other. The clinicians have to be there, sitting next to the data scientists, sitting next to the social scientists at every step of the way. They're gonna do sanity checks. Because what you're going to find is that there's a lot of problems with the data. And you need to make sure that we have what we refer to as the data fidelity, that the data truly captures what is happening in the real world, that the data truly captures the ground truth about a certain disease and its treatment. So, again, we've seen this in other countries where the clinicians are there at the beginning and then they leave, they go back to the hospital, and they come back at the end. Again, the purpose of this is what we refer to as hive learning. This is the only way you're going to learn AI for healthcare. You will not learn it in the classrooms, I could tell you that. Especially in a classroom where you're all the same students from the same department. That's not how it's going to work. So our courses are specifically designed to be very similar to this, where we have students from all different schools. And I think that you should demand that you do the same here in Uganda, in Ghana, in Rwanda. Somehow, we need to blow things up a little bit and be more out of the box in terms of how do you teach, how do you learn, how do you think, how do you work together. And it's not going to look anything like what we have been doing in the last 100 years. That is required, that is the prerequisite for AI to deliver its promise. To the data scientists, do not come up with assumptions on your own. Every assumption and definition has to be made with people who understand how the data was collected. So, and we see this. And my pet peeve among students is, oh, can you be involved in our project? And then they show me the model with some AUC. Like, no, this is going to be an autopsy. This project is dead on arrival. You should have involved me. You should have involved the clinicians from the very beginning. And I would refuse to look at their models. Like, or they show me their table 1 or even their exploratory data analysis. Like, no, I want to be involved in how you came up with the design of your experiment. I want to be involved in watching you try to understand the data. I refuse to listen, and people have criticized me. Like, these students worked hard, but I want to teach them a lesson. That is wrong research behavior. That is not the right way to learn. And you take every opportunity to learn from each other throughout the entire life cycle of a model. That is what's most important. And I always say that again, I get faulted for saying that I don't care about the paper at the end. What I care about is what you learn in the process. What you learn through the process is the cake. The paper is the icing, and I don't want you to just focus on eating the icing. I want you to enjoy the cake. And people say, oh, you can do that because you're already established. But I think we have abided by this ethos from the very start. And I keep saying, I said yesterday, that even if this funding runs dry, like we have been working together since 2010 without any funding. And we were able to grow our village without any funding. So I think we can do that as well for the next 10, 15, 50 years. And that's our biggest investment, is how we create that culture where we rediscover the joy of learning. We rediscover curiosity. I think we need the clinicians and the social scientists to always be having a healthy skepticism, paranoia about the data. I want the data scientists to always question too the data, like how did the data came about, who got into the database, who did not get into the database. That's very important. And every time you exclude some data because, oh, it's not quality data, just be aware that every time you exclude some data, you're already adding bias. It's possible that although people that you excluded from your database are refugees from DRC and from South Sudan, so suddenly the model is not going to work for them because you excluded them because the images are so poor. And we've had this debate as well of how good quality of a data do you need? Because if you train your data on good quality, if you train your model on good quality data, I could guarantee you that the model is going to fail in the real world because there's no such thing as real-time good quality data. So I want you to think through these issues of what is the ideal quality of the data that we need to train our models on. And I would always criticize the machine learning community that even that fundamental question, we don't know the answer. We're always looking for nicely curated data where the labels are perfect and the features are perfect. Like, good luck with that. It's not going to work in the real world. And I mentioned earlier that the study design is going to change over time. And sometimes both data scientists and clinicians like, why are you telling me that we're changing the question? Like, no, we're not changing the question. We're going to have to reframe it because our data set does not really capture the outcome that we're interested in. That the proxy that we thought that we have is a good proxy turns out to be not a good proxy at all. So be prepared to pivot about your definitions and assumptions as you dive deeper into the data set. So this is the error interrogation I'm talking about. At the end of your model, when you have a very good model with a 90% accuracy, I want you to take time to understand what differentiates the false negatives from the true negatives. What differentiates the false positives from the true positives. And we're trying to come up now with packages on how to do this, because you don't stop even when your model is 98%, because you're going to be killing 2% with your AI. And finally, I think this is the most important thing. Even from the very start, you start thinking of how will this model be deployed in the real world. And I keep saying that we should stop building models. We should start building human AI systems. Because the truth is, we don't know how the users, how humans, how clinicians, how patients will behave different when given a prediction by AI. And we've seen papers after papers where they have a model with 98% accuracy, and then suddenly they find that it's killing more people. And what we also know is that the effect of AI on different users is going to be very heterogeneous. So don't expect that everyone's accuracy is going to get better. One of the papers that I love to discuss is where they found that AI actually harmed the performance of experienced radiologist. Because as soon as AI gave this experienced radiologist a different reading, and AI turned out to be correct, and then the experienced radiologist realized that he or she was mistaken, that radiologist started losing confidence, and he or she started making more mistakes. So to me, and it's a controversial statement, if I were teaching a machine learning class, I would stop the students, I would tell them to stop building models, but to really start designing model human system. And that's not easy. That is 1,000, 10,000 times more difficult than building models alone. Last year, we conducted a policy camp where we asked the students to imagine what would be the worst scenario if this particular model gets into the hands of the wrong people. So imagine the worst nightmare that could happen. And I think one of the algorithms that we discussed last year was an algorithm that could predict the sexual identity. And it was very accurate. And what they did was they predicted whether a person is gay or straight from photographs that were collected from dating sites. And of course, it had good labels of whether you're straight or gay depending on where the photos came from. And we challenged the students to think of what are the worst scenarios if this algorithm gets into the hands of the government, gets into the hands of an employer, or gets into the hands of a university. So again, we want to make critical thinkers out of each and every one of you. So start thinking of where will this fit in? And the other thing that you forget is that data does not come in a package when you start deploying it in real time. The data elements would come at different times, and some of them are artifacts, some of them are really in the classroom you would remove them, but in real time you won't be able to do that. So start thinking, for example, if it's an algorithm that will predict whether a person is going to get better in the intensive care unit, you build your model when you already have all the data. And this is perfect recipe for what we refer to as data leakage. And you're trying to predict something where you include data already that happen in the future. So again, it's not as simple as we have a data set, we have something to predict, let's build that model. You have to think much harder than that. That is not going to solve any problem. But most importantly, we want you to enjoy. If you don't enjoy today and tomorrow, then we have failed. Because what we want is for you to associate AI and data science with the joy of learning. Learning from each other, and not just about AI, learning about each other's experiences and lives, because this is social capital. This is what we really want to get from the NIH funding, is to have this ecosystem where people from different backgrounds across generations are able to work with each other and truly enjoy each other's company, truly enjoy conversing with each other, because that is the best investment that we can have. Yes, I think that the papers will come naturally if you have inculcated everyone with the joy of learning, inculcated everyone with curiosity. And it's almost like it's a natural product of what the environment would provide us if we invest enough energy in making sure that that environment is truly a safe space for people to challenge each other. I think that we have been strong advocates against power imbalance. When we write papers, I always try to convince everyone that people should be listed in alphabetical order, and there's a statement there that says that everyone contributed to her or his best ability, because people always would complain, but I wrote more of the paper than she did. Well, do you have 3 kids to take care of? Maybe she had more issues while you were performing the study. But it doesn't discount the value of what she gave. So we're very much against the traditional academic environment where you are graded according to your merit. And merit sometimes is disguising as privilege. I say that the good news is we have such a low bar. Doctors have very poor sensitivity and specificity. And if you compare that to AI, AI is always going to beat a single doctor because the AI is harnessing lessons learned from a million doctors. And I'm hoping that this doesn't deter you from going into this field because there is so much room for improvement. And I'm the first one to admit that I make biased decisions at 2 a.m. in the morning. I make biased decisions when I'm hungry. And this is where AI could really help. I was just reviewing a paper where AI is being used to generate society recommendations on how to treat diabetes, society recommendations on how to treat glaucoma. And to me, I don't need a perfect AI for that because I know that the society that comes up with these guidelines have a lot of conflicts of interest, that some of them work for pharmaceutical companies. And of course, we try our best to weed out conflict of interest. The focus is still on financial conflict of interest. There's a lot of other sources of conflict of interest. And that's what we might be able to shave off when we use AI, when we feed AI the last 10,000 papers in the last 10 years and see what it could come up with when it comes to recommendations that are, for example, local for Ugandans, for Rwandans, for Kenyans, for Ghanaians. So the good news is, and this is the good news and also the reason why we shouldn't stop doing what we're doing. In fact, we have to hurry up because every day that ticks, or every hour, every time that ticks is a life being harmed. So it's very important that we learn how to, it's very important for us to build the plane while we are flying it. But we have to make sure that there's a good landing, that even if it crashes, that we are not all gonna perish. And I think we can do this if we're all thinking together as a village. And then the second question is, yes, I completely agree that we can do both. They're not mutually exclusive. And that's what we have been doing in all our projects, is we knew that the paper is going to come easy when people enjoy each other's company. And yes, I am guilty of truly not having a distinction between work life and play because I've discovered the joy of learning. So it doesn't bother me when we talk about projects when we're hanging out at night or in the weekends. Again, easier for me. It's a privilege, and I have to acknowledge that it's a privilege to be able to enjoy learning. For a lot of people, they are measured by certain metrics, as we know, and they cannot afford not to perform this well at the end of their evaluation period. But it should be looking at where you would like to go, but at the same time looking down to make sure that you are not slipping or you don't stumble into a stone. And it's really, that's the life goal, is to be able to do that, where you have a moonshot of where you want to go, but at the same time you're practical enough that you know that you have to be careful step by step, and you are heading in the right direction the entire time. And you're quick enough to realize that, oh my God, I have somehow veered off from my original destination. And you're more likely to do that, again, if you're walking with people who don't think like you. So I love the saying, if everyone is thinking alike, it means everyone is not thinking. Because if someone had been thinking, that person would have pointed out that, hey, we're all thinking alike here. We're not seeing all the blind spots. Our blind spots are all overlapping. And for that reason, there's so many missing pieces. So to me, scientific thinking is only possible if you bring people from computer science, engineering, nursing, pharmacy, medicine, anthropology, linguistics together. It's almost like it's automatic, it's natural for data science to happen, for critical thinking to happen, for systems thinking to happen, if you are putting in the right ingredients. Any other questions?
Yes. I have a quick question, Leon. Here, for many of us, and the recent thing that motivates us to work on AI here is that we have these populations of people with illness that we care about, and we have anxiety that they could be left behind by models built in, just to say it out loud, the global north, right? And so when you guys are looking at this, as you build these models, is your thought more multiple models, and maybe we don't know yet, but multiple models that fit varied populations, or validating larger models for each population? And like, how would you know you're there, right? Like, does there need to be sort of an FDA for AI where Uganda validates the model for looking at the cervix, et cetera, et cetera?
Why we focus so much on the education piece, because AI is so broad, it's so ubiquitous that it's going to be almost impossible to oversee AI. And I think we've come to the conclusion that the government is not going to have the expertise to do this, and everyone has to step up. Universities would have to play a role, health systems would have to play a role, even high schools would have to play a role, because health systems wouldn't have the budget to hire data scientists and clinicians to locally validate and then to continuously monitor AI. That's one thing that I failed to mention, is that your job is not done once you have a model. It only has started. Your job is to make sure that this model is not killing a group of patients. So there has to be a pipeline for continuous evaluation. And what do you evaluate? You're not going to evaluate the sensitivity and specificity. I think that, again, there's a misconception that you will be able to do this once an AI is deployed. Once AI is deployed, you will no longer know the counterfactual. You will no longer know if acute kidney injury would have happened if the AI wasn't there, because the clinicians did something different as a result of AI. All you can monitor would be patient outcomes in the end. You're going to look at the mortality from cervical cancer. You're going to look at the rate of blindness from diabetes. And when you're seeing some widening of gaps between some groups, hey, in total, the population's outcome when it comes to blindness or when it comes to cervical cancer, it's improved. But you should make sure that you disaggregate that. Make sure that you focus on the people who suddenly have worse outcomes from these diseases after you deploy the AI. And what needs to happen? When that happens, you stop AI. You start collecting data again. And then you recalibrate your old model on the new data. To me, this is how you do clinical validation of AI. I don't believe in the traditional form of prospective randomized controlled trial. That's going to fail because that takes 1 to 2 years. By the time you finish a prospective randomized controlled trial, your model is already outdated and you have to start from scratch again. So to me, again, we have to be creative on how do we validate this, because none of the legacy systems that we have for validation, for regulation, for education, for innovation, they're all going to crumble. They're all going to fail big time with AI, just because of how fast this technology is moving. And this is the challenge for everyone, is to reimagine what systems could look like. Because we have this very, very powerful technology, and every day I'm amazed at what AI can do. And people are focusing on the hallucinations now, like, oh, give it 2 minutes and the hallucinations will get better as you feed it more data. So rather than really criticizing the state of AI now, you have to be prepared, because AI is going to get better with each month. But you have to make sure that the system is really designed to absorb the potential unintended harm by AI. But this is the sort of thinking that we want to encourage, that we want to keep emphasizing, because to me, this is the true value of AI, is allowing us to think and to reimagine the world as it should be.
So when we set out to start this project, the rationale behind is that the images of the back of the eye can help us to, diagnose a number of diseases, both at the back of the eye, but also systemic diseases. But there was this realization that in as much as there is this opportunity, there were serious gaps that we're facing in Africa. First of all, some of the things you talked about them yesterday, that these models that were available to use have been developed with data that is not African. And so we could not really use them reliably in our setting. But then we also realized that we did not have sufficient data in Africa to be able to start these projects. Our group had been doing a lot of retinal imaging since 2018. We were going around the community screening people for diabetic retinopathy. So we'd go to clinics and take images and immediately read them to know whether they have diabetic eye disease or not. But these pictures were not collected in a manner that would support research, because all the people signed up to just have their pictures taken for diagnostic and treatment purposes. So you could say they were not ethically sourced. Also, they were not really linked to rich metadata. I mean, all we were interested in was to make a diagnosis of diabetic retinopathy. So we could not use them. So that's why we decided to start and do a nice systematic data collection to collect this very large repository of retinal images that we could use. And I know Leo doesn't like models, but we wanted to have this data set available with African images that then we could use to develop our own models. And from these models, then we could implement these in our setting and see if they can support us in the diagnosis and care of patients. And Jessica touched on implementation science yesterday. So I'll just walk you through briefly the pathway of how we collected this data. We had fundus camera technicians led by Gerard, as I pointed out. So these were really trained and experienced people, a very robust team of young men who had been working with us since 2018 in the diabetic retinopathy screening project. Then we deployed them at different hospital sites. And we're very careful to make sure this data is ethically sourced. So we had the informed consent. Now we added on collecting additional data that could help us make more meaning of these images. So this included demographic data. It included additional variables, which you're going to explore in the data set. So I don't want to indulge so much because it's going to be fun for you to find out by yourselves, as well as anthropometric data, which we could use to calculate a number of things. We collected visual data, the vision of these patients, what the intraocular pressures were, and then we acquired these images. So these images, after acquiring them, were uploaded on a server that was developed by our own in-house DMAC team, and then they were labeled. So after that was a process of data cleaning, and they have them ready for you today to use. So this is how the data collection looked like. So we had a team going in the different mobile clinics that we set up in the different parts of Uganda and Kenya as well. So after informed consent, patients would give patients would give a brief history. I would collect additional information, lifestyle, alcohol use, smoking, as well as medical history, whether you're on treatment for any of the non-communicable diseases. Then we'll take their visual acuity and intraocular pressures, and then we'll acquire the image using these mobile cameras. This is just a map showing some of the sites we have collected this information in Uganda, the different hospitals. I know someone's about to shout out bias, as well as Kenya. So you realize again, like Leo was mentioning, it's not really largely representative, but was more of a pragmatic approach where we had an ongoing screening happening. We plan to expand this in future, but this is the data we have currently. At least we can say it's a representative of Kenya and Uganda. These are the cameras we used. In Uganda, we predominantly, almost 100% I think, used the 3-Netra camera. This is developed by a group, Forest Health from India. And then in Kenya, we use the Canon CR1 Mark II camera. We've been doing some of small projects to compare the image quality in these cameras that I'll touch on. This is how the images were stored on the server. We took 2 images per eye, meaning that each patient contributed a total of 4 images. And we aimed to have, so I think this is a pointer here. So there's this, round thing which looks like a donut. That's the optic nerve head. And then, so we aimed to have a picture with the optic nerve head in the center. And then this sort of dark-looking pigmented tissue. This is the bull's eye of the retina. That's the back of the eye, the most sensitive part of the eye. So I wanted to capture those 2 per eye, the donut in the center as well as the bull's eye in the center. And we uploaded these in a systematic way that helps us to track who took the image, where it was taken, when it was taken, and what image it is, for purposes of our own quality control later as we evaluate the images. So this is just some of the old table. This data has changed a lot, but just to show you the sort of patients that we had from the different sites, and to also highlight at the bottom here some of the diseases that we looked at. So these are patients who had hypertension, diabetes, and HIV. And again, you will be able to access some of this data. We then conducted image labeling to attach labels to these images that we had collected. And some of the colleagues were here in this camp. We were fortunate to have a number of pre-intern medical doctors whom we trained, and they were able to label these images. It's quite a huge task to do, and they did a good job, I would say. And so we had some different experiments at this process, whether additional metadata improves the accuracy of a labeler or not, and we've published on that. So next was data cleaning, and this included a number of things. It's quite a painful process actually, and I must thank Michael and Catherine. They've worked so much to have this in some sort of shape and form that is that we'll be able to share with you today. But it included things like de-identifying the data, which was very important. So all the data that you will be interfacing does not have any identifiers on. It has some numbers, but these are dummy numbers that have been created to be able to link these to the metadata as well as the vectors. Then remove duplicate data. We treated missing data with different codes, which you'll be able to see, such as NC, this is not collected, or 99, or 88, as you will see in the data dictionary. Then we did some conversions. For example, there were people where height was collected in meters as opposed to centimeters, so we had to do those conversions, as well as standardizations, like is this a fasting blood sugar test or it's a random blood sugar test, and how do we treat that? Then creating new variables, as I mentioned, from the anthropometry, you can be able to generate, if you have the height and the weight, you can be able to generate what we call a BMI of this patient. So we looked at the image quality from our data set, and we were looking at focus, illumination, as well as artifacts that could be picked up by the labelers. Now this is something that we found quite interesting, and if you're setting up a labeling infrastructure, it's something you may want to consider. So we found that image quality was highly correlated with the device which had been used to label. So you may want to invest in, high definition infrastructure with good screens, because then that sort of improves the image quality, and you'll be able to see some of the things that you may not see with other devices. There was some additional analysis in the dataset that we've done, such as the quick qual, which again looks at the image quality, as well as the fractional dimensions, which looks at how the complexity of the vessels in the retina. So we generated a data dictionary, and I think as you access the dataset, you will also access this, which talks about the different variables that are in this data set. This is a busy slide, but basically what you will see is the variable, the description of the variable, the units which were used, and also some sort of explanation what it actually means. So as you explore this data, you will be able to access this. Yeah, so I invite you to look in the box and see what we can find together. Thank you very much.
Participate and share your thoughts with us, and also discuss among yourselves. You're already seated at tables, and hopefully you have lots of bright, interesting people around you. And also during this initial phase where we sort of talk a bit and then ask you a question, I'm really good at dealing with silence. So sometimes I talk to people and no one wants to raise their hand because maybe they're afraid they will say something that is slightly incorrect. But I'm really good at dealing with silence. So if none of you participate, then we will miss lunch because I will just wait until someone raises their hand. So please actively participate and share your thoughts, and we would really appreciate it. And then also, we're both still learning. Well, some of us are very accomplished, but especially me, I'm very, I have a lot to learn. And, we can talk about the thoughts that we have, and, we will have some examples about data sets that we've analyzed in the past, and I can tell you the things that I thought about, but there will be lots of important things that I will have missed, but that you might have thought about. So please really share your thoughts, and it's really important to have people with different perspectives. And also, Matthew and I, we're both not clinicians, so if I say something that's incorrect, please raise your hand and say, wait, no, that's not right. And I will really appreciate it, because I need to learn, and to do good work, I need to learn more and more about medicine, and if I have a misunderstanding, please let me know. So for instance, I work in ophthalmology, and most people have roughly 3 eyes. Some people have 4 eyes. Any thoughts on what I just said? Michael, you're an ophthalmologist. Is that anatomically correct? No? Yeah, great. So the next time, please just shout and say, Justin, this is not true. Because, otherwise I might go around and think people have 3 eyes because I know very little about medicine. And also, this is super important. So, people think that data scientists and AI people, they train models and they look at maps, and you might have seen these stock images of robots with lots of floating numbers and so on. But really, that's not what data science is about at all. It's all about understanding your data, and it's really hard. So if you don't understand the So the way that we thought we will do this is that we will start off with a data set that I've worked with in the past, and like I will try to walk you through kind of like how you should approach a data set, and it's also a retinal imaging data set, but this is like with a slightly different camera where you can see almost all of the retina. And then once we've walked through this first data set, we will look at like the like information that you have in the Modria data set, and then again together we will think about what kind of exploratory analyses should you do with the Modria data to understand it, to sanity check it, to see whether there's anything that doesn't make sense. And then after that, from my understanding, you'll be able to actually work with the Modria data set and do all of these analyses that we will discuss. So just for context here, the goal was to build a disease classifier. So you capture one of these images and now you want an AI model that tells you, first of all, is this eye healthy, but also if there's a disease, which disease is affecting the patient. And so, you know, I got the data set. What's the first thing I should do? Should I fit a model? Should I decide, should I use a convolution neural network or vision transformer? Any thoughts? What do you think? Like, please shout or raise your hand, or any thoughts? Yeah, Simon.
I think you want to first understand the data set.
Exactly. Like, you know, this is a zip file. Anything could be in there. It could be empty. It could be like, you know, sort of, it might be password protected and I might not be able to extract the data. So first I should see what's actually in the file. And in this case, I'm not sure, I hope it's not too small, but I had images in that, which is good. You know, maybe you get the data set, like, you know, if you're working with someone and they send you something, maybe it's not what you expect, some of it is missing, but you had image files and a kind of Excel spreadsheet with this kind of metadata. So have a look. Do you think sort of like these things are reasonably self-explanatory? Anything you're unsure? I think in this case it's quite straightforward. And then one thing that people, especially with clinical backgrounds, might not appreciate, but sometimes I work with people and they send me images and they send me metadata, but the images will have identifiers that are not in the metadata, and the metadata won't have the image names or anything in there. So sometimes I need to tell people I need a way to sort of match them together. But here we have in the metadata something called image name, and actually that's the name of the image file, so we can link it well. So that's all good.
Actually, can you go back a slide? So I want to point out one other aspect of exploratory data analysis that's really important, especially in this interdisciplinary area, which is in this view of this data set, in the metadata here, we have this wonderful key that says what all of these abbreviations mean. It says, oh, AMD is age-related macular degeneration, GLA is glaucoma, but in a real data set you might not have that key, right? So something that you should also do very early in the process of exploratory data analysis is immediately go and ask the people who are giving you the data, the clinicians, the experts working with it, what do all of these things mean? And you should do that even when you think you might know what they mean, because sometimes you might be wrong. And that can often help ameliorate misunderstandings way before they propagate down into big errors in the modeling stage.
That's an excellent point. Actually for the Modria dataset, when we made these slides, we didn't have the data dictionary, and there's a column called random_BS. And I'm not a clinician, so my first thought isn't that BS stands for blood sugar, and I'm a bit confused what it means. And this is like often you have very cryptic names and you need to understand what are these things. So, you know, you have these variables. Maybe I will go back to the slide afterwards, but, you know, so now we've looked at, what's in the data. What's our next step? So should we now train a model, or should we now sort of go and invent some new maths and do something really fancy? What should we do? What would you do if you were in my shoes and sort of you got this data set and you had these bits of metadata? Simon?
You may want to understand what each variable, sort of, what is in each variable, and what is missing, what is...
So how would you do that? So you mentioned missingness, so you would check whether, in the spreadsheet there's gaps, but what else would you check?
Ranges, Yeah.
Can you? Can anyone else maybe like so?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it will also be very important at this point to understand the different data types you have for the data set, because we are seeing other different examples. We don't know whether this is characters, whether we don't understand those things. So you need to use some kind of software to understand how is actually captured these different data types. I think would be important.
Can you elaborate a bit for people that might not like have a technical background? What do you mean by data types? What are you thinking about? Can you sort of give an example?
Okay. Thank you. What I meant by data types, when we're doing analysis, we have different, I don't know the other synonym of data type, but how data is represented or captured. We have, for example, you're writing names. Those are characters. If I'm analyzing a variable which is characters, it's not the same way I'm going to analyze a variable which is numeric. Like, for example, our age. Age is usually captured as numeric. Okay? So you need to understand that. And also, at times, it could be that a variable with dominated bytes, you can see that it is in numeric. But when you analyze like in Python or R, actually it is not seen as numeric as you can see. And you can't complain with hey, why aren't you? So you need to make sure these programming language have ways how you can convert this to what you want. If you want it to be numeric, then you convert. If it is R, you are aware of the way how we convert. So you need to be very much aware about that.
That's an excellent point. Like as an example, and like again, like for instance, Catherine, yesterday you said vector embeddings are still scary. I will try to explain something, and please say like can you explain it better, and I will make an effort to explain it well. For instance, in this data set, we have patient sex, and it was coded as M or F, and you can make the reasonable assumption that okay, maybe they mean male and female. In other cases, you sort of need to be careful about those assumptions. But this was a data set from Japan, and most of the M and Fs were normal M and Fs, but then there were some M and Fs that were like the Japanese kind of like Japanese typeset for an M and F. So kind of like to a human they look quite similar, but to a computer they're different. So in your code, if you sort of like take all the M's and convert them to zeros, all the F's you convert them to ones, you actually introduce some mistakes. So you need to check all the values in the column to make sure that doesn't happen. That's great. Previously, Dr. Arunga mentioned that like you want to check the ranges of like, for instance, age. Can anyone tell me why do I want to check the ranges of the age? I mean, like like why do I care how old people are? What am I interested in? Yeah.
When you're looking at different disease conditions, you find that some are more prevalent in different age ranges. So it will give you a better way to categorize your data. So if you're looking at this age group and you're looking at the disease conditions you've been looking at, in a certain age group, some disease conditions will be more common than others. So that will help you when it comes to drawing conclusions from your data.
That's excellent, yes. That's something that I will have as an example later on. But to me, this is almost like quite an advanced analysis. So kind of like this is something I do with every data set, and it's super important. But before you do that, sort of like, at the moment we're still in kind of like the very basic sanity checking, like, sort of, do we have the data? Can we understand the data? And kind of like, is the data, does it make sense? So is there something else, maybe you or anyone else, where you would want to check the ranges of age to make sure that nothing funny is going on?
We also had you and then
Maybe you, like, so we hear more voices, like if that's all right, and then we can come to you.
Okay, yeah. In addition to what you have said, I think it would be very important to check the ranges, because they could be what we call outliers. Maybe at the point of entry, somebody registered somebody who is 200 years old, and that does not make sense. So we need to make a decision if either go back at the beginning, at the entry, people who enter that to understand what will happen here. And maybe, it was a mistake actually. I meant 20 years, not 200, something like that.
Yeah.
It's very, very important to understand the range.
That's excellent.
Yeah, so what we are looking at is, first of all, we have the goal, which is building a disease classifier. And we have data, we have metadata and the data set. So what we look at is data importance, the feature importance, sorry. So about the age, why do we have to look at from maybe 0 to 65? That will depend on like the future importance. How is a different, like how is the different column affecting the model, like how is it affecting the predictions of the model? Let's say which columns or which features do we need most? There are features that they don't influence much. Is age affecting the performance of the model or the goal? No. If it's yes, then we look at how is it affecting it. That's where we come up with, let's say, maybe people who are old are affected by this disease, and people maybe who are not old or are young are not affected so much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great thought. I want to tease out one key nuance from that, which is, in this scenario where we're just looking at the data at the start, we have our goal, which is to predict the disease, but we don't necessarily even have a model yet. But nevertheless, we can still do things to try and approximate the importance of certain features to the label. And this actually is really related to what the other gentleman suggested as well, of looking at in different age ranges, do we have different associations with other metadata in our sample, including the disease label. And there are other metrics that may come up later as well that you can ask about how are different features associated with things that we might care about. So this is a reasonable thing to think about even before you have a model in place of how are these different features related. That also is a more advanced topic. Again, you want to start with the very easy, the very obvious things like, do we have people who are 200 years old? But that is these sorts of feature relationships is another important area to look at when doing exploratory data analysis.
And going back to maybe some of the more basic stuff, so we were talking about outliers. If you have someone who's 200 years old, that's maybe a bit implausible. Oh yeah, please go.
I think some of these things are hard to see from CSV files. So maybe you could try to visualize a couple of things so you can be able to see outliers that are, and you catch them before you even go further, or see the deviations and from a couple of things, or think of trying to visualize the data.
That's perfect. So like you're thinking making like plots and data visualizations, exactly, like sort of like that, and also another maybe fairly basic element, but a lot of people that start in machine learning and AI often don't think about is like, look at your data. So make plots, but also open the spreadsheet and read some of the rows and kind of like see what's going on. And also there's images, look at the images. What do the images look like and so on. So kind of understanding the data. For the basic sanity checks, one reason to also check the range of age and make some plots, for instance, is like sometimes people will code missing values as minus 99. Sometimes they will code them by leaving a gap in the spreadsheet. And if you sort of don't account for that, maybe you will sort of, compute the average age, but you actually include the minus 99 values in your average. Another reason to look at the range of age is to think about, we're training an AI model that we want to then use in practice. And we need to think about how does the population we have now match the target population. So for instance, if our screening model is supposed to be used in children as well, do we have children in this data set, or are we training model only on adults? Like, sort of like, are all the people in this data set in their 30s, and actually we want to like have a model that works well on 60-year-olds as well. So kind of like to understand the population, and also then think about, like when I did this work, I like try to also look at like data about the age structure of Japan, and sort of like, you know, how representative is this data compared to like other people in Japan. So there's like a lot of these things. So this is like still really, really basic stuff, and maybe to some of you it sounds like a bit boring, like, you know, like sort of you were promised we would do cool AI, but actually this sort of stuff is super important, and there's so many mistakes you can make here, and like it's sort of like the hardest part of the job, but the most important one. We have patients ID, like, you know, is every image of a different patient? Is it not? How many images do we have per patient? How many images show disease? How many patients have eye disease? Like, you know, sort of like really basic things. Like, you know, is this a cohort of people that have lots of eye disease, very little eye disease? And also, like, you know, sort of like, for instance, like, are some of the diseases more common in male and female patient? And really, like, look at the images. So, like, you can train a model and it might work reasonably well without ever looking at the data, but you will be so much better, and there's so many mistakes you can avoid if you actually look at the data yourself to understand what's going on. So, for instance, like, you know, I looked at the patient level, who has, like, you know, who is healthy, who has these different diseases, how many eyes are there, how many images are there, what's the age. And for instance, I also looked at like the distribution of sex, and 50% of the data was female. Now, can anyone tell me whether, like, just focus on this left table, can anyone tell me, is this what you would expect? Is there anything like unexpected? Does it make sense? Can anyone give me some thoughts? Again, please raise your hand, otherwise we will miss lunch. Yeah.
There are too many acronyms, which ophthalmologists are notorious for.
Well, I think all specialists fall into the acronym trap. But okay, so I blame ophthalmologists explicitly, and like, you know, medicine would be better off if they used fewer acronyms. Anything else? Like, you know, does this data make sense to you? For instance, let's hone in on 50% female patients. We might say, great, like, you know, we want representative data sets, so 50% female patients, it's a good thing, right? Like, this is sort of, what do you guys think? Any thoughts on 50% female patients? Where? Oh, yeah.
I think that's a good thing, because we know in a random situation, females are almost equal to men. So when they are correcting, they do not bias one sex over the other.
That's great, yes. So for instance, like, you know, in the past, and maybe unfortunately in the present and near future, sometimes people collect data only of men, and they do healthcare research, and they go like, you know, well, you know, in women there's like the hormonal cycle and whatever, so they suit them. So it's good that like there's like fairly good representation. But I want to challenge the 50-50 ratio. So like, I'm not a clinician, and again, this might be wrong, but my understanding is that in most populations, female people live longer, and if you look at the age, so this is quite an old population, and given that, like, from what I understand, women live longer, I would have expected that there should be more women in this age group in Japan than men. So my assumption is that actually this data set is slightly biased, in the sense that it doesn't really reflect the Japanese population in this age group.
What we've been able to do so far just at this symposium. Of the membership here, I think about half of you, so 82, maybe a little less than half, 40%, have started the process of joining the village. So thank you. Hopefully the rest of you will be able to do it as well. But we've noticed that very few have actually completed your profiles. And that's understandable. I will admit, the first time I signed up, I didn't do all of it. Because I wanted to play with it, and that's completely understandable. We want you to explore our site. Again, we're going to ask you for your feedback as partners in developing the village. So please do play with it. Take a look at the different pages, see how it's working for you in terms of the experience. But if you could please sign up and complete your profile, that would be really helpful. It doesn't have to be 100%. I know these profiles can be sometimes onerous to complete, but even 25% of a profile will be helpful in you finding the match that you want. And again, it'll help us know how our algorithms are working. I will say, so these components, I don't think you can see the pointer, but the AI model requires job title, interests, offerings, and areas of expertise. So if you don't want to fill out the entire profile, again, completely understandable, but this is how our model is anchored. I'm sure many of you have built models in different ways, but these are the key elements that help us make sure that we can not only match you, but communicate to you who you're matched with. So if you could prioritize those, that would be helpful. And I believe our developers have been like adjusting the flow so it's obvious which one of these different components of the profile are most useful. So it's not mandatory, but again, the more we know about you, the more we can help you find your matches. So if you have any questions, I'm sitting right over here. Please feel free to come and talk to me later. We also have other members of the village who I think are around. Anyone here? I don't see them right now, but they're around. So just come talk. We'll be happy to answer any questions, and thank you very much for your participation.
So before we start, I'd like to give you a small energizer. I know you've eaten, and I want you to be alert throughout this session. So can we stand? All right, we are going to do the things that John says we do. Okay? John says sit. Okay, nice. Okay, John says stand. John says sit. John says clap. Sit. Ah, you all failed. You're not doing the things that John says we do. I just said sit and remain seated. Shall we go again? Okay. John says stand. John says sit. Stand. Ah, you failed. Whoever stood failed actually. Okay, thank you so much. So by way of introduction, my name is Martin Mukama. I work with Mbarara University as the Senior Prototyping and Technology Development Officer, and I've also been key in the organizing of this datathon. So we are going to start with a very small exercise. We want to do grouping, which is very important. We want you to work in groups. So I would like to know how many people carry their laptops first. How many people carry their laptops in the room? What's the laptop with them? Such a small number. Because we want you to access the platform and then you do the things that we want you to do. How many people have some experience in Python? So the first server is running. So if you look there, the first server is running at massdatathon.org, and then we have 3 subdomains, okay? And James and Rogers will be helping you to connect to the appropriate servers. And then create for you an account. Because right now you cannot access any of the servers, right? You just stop at the login page. Our computer is connected to internet. So we're going to start creating accounts for all the groups, okay, so that you can access the platform, and then we show you how the platform works. All right, so you don't have to install the libraries globally for everyone. You might want to use specific libraries, so you can use them in your virtual environment. And we have the 3 steps that will help you to accomplish that. And then this is the path to the datasets that we have. The way the infrastructure is set up, we have one file server that is storing all our datasets, but you can access those datasets through the application servers that we have set up for you to use. And you cannot do any editing to that dataset. You only access it, read it, load it into your Jupyter notebooks, and then you can perform different manipulations to that dataset. So we'll be using the first dataset, which is the Mbarara dataset. It has metadata mostly, and that's the dataset that we'll be using. But we also have an extra 2 datasets that we set up on the file server that we are using. The second dataset just has the vector embeddings that were extracted from the Mbarara images. And then we have the third dataset that has metadata and the vector embeddings that were extracted from the Mbarara images. So this is how Jupyter Notebooks works. You have like different cells where you can write your code. If you have installed your libraries, so maybe I'm going to take you through how you can create the virtual environment first, okay? So that you know how it's done, isn't it? So don't worry about signing in, just look at what I'm doing. Once I'm done with this session, we shall move around and make sure that every group has an account to use, okay? And after my session, I'll invite Michael to tell you about the kinds of things that we might want each group to work on. Because tomorrow we'll be having presentations on your findings from the dataset that you'll be using.
Statistics Statistics 101. Statistics 101 is a book that I'm writing. So there are a few things you know. So you go out and start absorbing. Let's say with fire. You know that things are water, they can burn. You touch them, they burn you. And now you have that data that such things that look like this and in a way AI is trying to get information and then using it to guide us. But going back to anyone, if I give my numbers, okay? Yeah, I think that it's a field of science where we try to it's like there is something in the world that is better than so much. So you
What is that about?
it is already there.
Yeah, it's because you're seeing a very small part of the data. It's not showing you all the data.